Good now.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission February 14th, 2024 meeting. I'm going to turn it over to Drew for the rules of the meeting.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Drew Bilby, planner. I will be helping facilitate the Zoom video portion of the meeting. We will work alongside the vice chair to facilitate the meeting proceedings. I have a few housekeeping items for this hybrid meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you are not speaking. The chat function for this public meeting is disabled. All chats will go directly to me. Unless you are participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. This allows active meeting participants to be seen on screen. You will still be able to hear the meeting. When you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send a chat to me. The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions during the meeting. And now I'll turn the meeting over back to the vice chair.
Thanks, Drew. I'm going to turn it over to Becky for today's agenda.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Welcome. It's been a couple months since we've had one of these, so welcome back, and we'll get back into the swing of it. A couple items. So today we have kind of we have two items on our agenda. We're going to be I'm going to go first and kind of go over some stuff I'll talk about in a minute, but also our main gist of today. We're really lucky that we've got our Affordable Housing Administrator, Leah Roslin, will be joining us. She couldn't make it right at the start, so I'm going to take that time to go over a couple other things, but then when she's here, we'll want to get straight onto her, and she's going to be here to teach us a little bit more about affordable housing and help answer any questions that you all might have. So I thought first I would go over just high level briefly about our upcoming Planning Commission meeting. So we'll be meeting on Monday, February 26th. So we will not be meeting on Wednesday. We'll be meeting on the Monday. And we have 3 agenda items scheduled for that night. So there are 2 rezoning applications. And then we have a text amendment. Actually, it's 2 text amendments that'll be presented together for your all consideration.
What are they?
They are to our land development code. In a nutshell, they are removing some overly burdensome processes for our site planning. They're related to administrative processes.
Good.
Okay. So on our next mid-month meeting, our March mid-month, we're going to be, we've set that topic aside to discuss bylaws. So kind of continuing the discussion that we had at our orientation. A couple of our good topics there, we talked about our meeting, the organization of our meetings. And so we wanted to provide some more time for that conversation. So look forward to that on March. To kind of prep for that, I wanted to go over a couple of resources. And I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Drew, I don't know if, because I'm not, this show up, let's find out if I share my screen. Okay. Great, thank you. So the orientation packet that was provided to you all at your orientation meeting late last year is up on your website. So on your Planning Commission website, you can find that, and you can also find the bylaws. So I would recommend reviewing your bylaws before March. And then within the orientation packet are some materials that talk about the types of planning applications, and I think that we went through this during orientation. I'm going to scroll onto some of the next pages, and we can come back and talk about anything that you might have questions about or want more information on. And then we've got information on the due process. And then these next few pages are where you can find more information about the review criteria that's associated with each of those applications that you may be coming before you, the review criteria as well as the decision-making, or, I'm sorry, scroll back up here, the development review decision-making criteria. So it's got the review criteria, and then there is more information as far as what all you can do, whether you can defer, what happens if there's a tie vote. That these are basically things that are pulled from our land development code that are easily accessible here. And then, please excuse me while I do some scrolling.
While Becky's scrolling, I'll take a moment to, fill the void here a little bit. The thing that we don't have listed here is what actually constituted application contents. And the code will have different application content requirements for each different type. So a rezoning is different from a CUP, which is different from any number of other ones there. So while you might see something that comes with the site plan, or excuse me, you might see something that comes with the rezoning, it might not be something we ask for until the site planning portion of it. So just so you know, there is different content requirements of what constitutes a complete application for each one.
And then on page 53 of that agenda, this is a table that was really pulled from our land development code, but it talks about, basically it's showing you the different types of applications that exist, who is the decision-making body, and if there is a public hearing that's associated with that. Sorry that this isn't all on one page to make that easier to read, but basically if there is an R, it's a that body is responsible is the reviewing body. If there's a DM, it's the decision-making body. And then if it is the two, I want to say arrows, that's not right. What they're called is escaping me. That is referring that there's a public hearing involved. So, for example, the text amendments, Planning Commission would be a reviewing body, and there would also be a public hearing that would be associated with that at that point in that meeting. And then it would move on to either the county or the city, depending on what code is being revised.
Is this the time and place where we would also add language about consent agendas?
As on March, when we talk about the bylaws, yes, that'll be part of that, because if we are going to amend, make amendments like that, that would be with the bylaws
Could we include that specifically to the list of things that we'll talk about?
in March.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
So the text I got was from Mike Kelso, and he said, "Are we having a meeting?" And where is Zoom? So that's what I showed.
I can send him the text if not.
I did. I said, "We'll get it started." So
It started.
It's up. So I don't know if maybe he has the wrong link.
Well, he has to go through he may or may not, but it's the same with any other meeting, right? You
Yeah, I will send him
put
the
the link
link.
in
Yeah.
an email with the,
If you want to let him know, I'm going to send him an email, and he'll get that link. That'd be great.
Do we have any other commissioners on Zoom?
No, not as of right now.
Okay.
Becky is going to send you an email with the link.
Wonder if they're having trouble. 'Cause I
Voice
I
text
thought you said
amazing.
maybe Chelsea would
Yes.
join remotely,
it
maybe.
raises my IQ.
Yeah, and I sent her the link
Sometimes
as well.
I've hit the foreign language one.
Jeff, do you want to check and make sure the link's working okay?
Which one?
The Zoom registration link?
I can try.
And I'll get something back that says,
Oh. Let me give it a whirl.
So has there been actually some progress on the consent agenda, or is that stuck somewhere?
It's still under review, yeah. I think basically, when there are some things that there are very few items that could be on the consent agenda because of if it requires a public hearing, then it would need to go on the regular agenda. So for example, a preliminary plat may be something that doesn't require a public hearing that could go on the consent agenda. If there's a variance associated with that, then it would go on the regular agenda.
Yeah. Just like to create the capability so that you have the option one
definitely.
of those things that can help
Yes,
decrease the length of our meetings.
yeah, yeah.
It's not the solution for anything, but it's maybe a little bit of help for a lot of things.
Yeah. So I didn't have a clear or let me go back to what I'm sharing. I didn't have a real set things that I wanted to talk about in that PC orientation, those materials that I showed you, but just kind of wanted to use this time if anybody had questions about the types of applications we see or the process that's involved, the review, anything, or ideas or things you kind of want to throw out to maybe prime the pump for your discussion at the March mid-month about the bylaws.
Do you, on a routine basis, tell us what happens to the things that we make a recommendation and they move on, and I never know what happens next? Maybe I don't read the newspaper well enough.
Yeah, we don't necessarily have an update on those items. I think that's it could be something to discuss in March on that process, or it could be a mid-month maybe where we come back and talk about just where things have concluded. But no, we don't generally come back with any updates on the process of projects.
So Becky, something that we've all spent a lot of time dealing with or talking about is the length of our meetings. So I just want to put a few things. I don't think we'll have time to discuss today, but I'll just put a few things for all of us to think about for next month. So I've heard potentially that we may try to end our meetings early, like at 11, to have like a potentially, I don't know that we've decided that, but if we do that, there's work that needs to get done. So do we need to add another day? Do we need to start earlier? What do we have to do to get the work done? So that's one question. Also, I've heard complaints that we get the public comment too late on a Monday, and that we don't have enough time to go through it. So is there something that we could do to sort of, again, we don't want to remove the public's ability to comment right up to, but, is there some compromise, something to think about? So that, at a high level, that's what is on my mind, is how to make our meetings more efficient so we can all go home but get the work done. I don't know if you guys have thoughts.
Agree. I think those are the questions.
Yeah. Those trade-offs. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. On the public comment, I don't know, I'm going to jump into solution, sorry, but I wonder, you have the 10 a.m. Monday cutoff. Is comment coming in and being queued, waiting for that drop? In other words, could there be additional drops or additional updates so that we don't have a larger amount, we have just a minimum amount come Monday at 10?
Yeah, so what happened, and Denny is the saint that helps us get this all together, and when we,
May want to take a pause in the conversation. We're having a bit of a Zoom hiccup here.
should we take a
Commissioner Kelpo diagnosed our Zoom issue for us.
should we take a 5-minute break, or?
Just a couple minutes, maybe.
Yeah, I'm just ending it and restarting it.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Can't hear me, but thank you.
He helped us figure out that there was a bit of a glitch in the system with that one.
Drew, do I need to send them the right Zoom link?
The link should be right.
Yeah, I use the same link. It looks like I'm getting back in.
But we're hosts, does that make a difference?
You're the hostess with the mostest.
Of course. I'm just knowledgeable enough to know that when I'm a co-host, I can't do the registration link, but I don't know if they're the same. I don't know if they're the same link.
That is exactly right. You cannot register if you're a host.
Yeah, because it says 2024 in the schedule.
I'm still getting the waiting for the meeting, waiting for the host to start.
Oh, and I know there's some confusion because when you click on the, talk about it later, but it should be the right, it has the dates for our mid-months listed.
I noticed most of our mid-months coming up are to be determined. So I imagine we have an opportunity to think about
Yeah.
other.
And some of it
topics.
too is there's a lot of kind of moving parts where if we were going to have, like our neighborhood groups come and give an update, don't quite know when to, we can put them on the calendar when we think we might, but it might not be the best time. So some of that's that.
We're going to be coming up on a massive change in land development code and using some of that mid-month time to get us ready for what's coming might be
Yeah.
a good use of time. And it's going to change.
For the better. Or just change.
It's going to change. Depends on your lens, I suppose. I think it's going in a great direction.
Yeah.
It's a different philosophy, different way of thinking, different paradigm.
And you have a meeting tomorrow, don't you? At 4?
Yes.
Yes, 4 to 6. I'll be joining remotely.
And that'll be recorded, right? I'm out of town.
Yes, yeah.
Thankfully going into Kansas City tomorrow, not today.
Drew, do we need to have Commissioner, so if Commissioner Hayden and Kelso try again, they should be able to get in now?
I think so. I mean, if the meeting is in progress, I can't, it's grayed out to start, so I have to imagine it started and it's up.
Do you, yeah, you
If you
see,
need, I can,
I can't-
Kurt's in, right?
You still can't get in?
Nope.
I have to think he doesn't have the right link or the same link.
And it's certainly not as interactive or fun, but they could watch it on YouTube. They'll be 7 seconds behind your conversation, but they could check it out.
But they couldn't participate.
Yeah, it's gonna be delayed,
Do we need to?
less than satisfying.
We can just, we
Yeah.
can keep going. I mean, I don't know what kind of
Yeah.
IT magic is occurring behind the scenes, but
Oh, I certainly blame my team.
not meaning to blame IT, but on the agenda it does say the primary
Yeah.
format is for in-person, so it's
I'll
about.
try one last thing and have Kurt email his link
He just
to Mike.
says That's the same
Listen,
link he's
I
been
don't have the right
trying.
link.
letting me-
which one?
That's from Mike Kelso.
Kurt, you want to?
Which link?
Oh, I don't know.
I would just try one last thing and ask if Kurt maybe could email the link that he just used to get in to Mike.
We can have
And if that doesn't work, then I'd say the problem's on Mike's side. Yeah.
Mike and Chelsea.
Chelsea's trying to get
She's
in?
also trying,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Okay.
What's Kelso's email?
mpkelso at,
I think Drew's on it, Kurt.
Okay, cool. I just don't happen to know his email. but I'll try to send it.
Do you have Chelsea's, oh, you're doing it, Drew, sorry. Never mind.
Yeah.
If you needed, I have it here, if you need the email.
I'm not cool enough to have her email either.
I did know, we're still going to try to do that bus ride, right?
That was a.
Yeah, we've been trying that for
Special
years,
request
yes.
for Commissioner Carter, and this is his, we're running up on a deadline for him.
Yeah, I
so
know.
We want to do that special for him, yeah.
The more of those kinds of things, the better, in my
Yeah,
opinion. Just
yeah.
get to learn about our county, spend time together.
If that one doesn't work, I don't know what we can use. Because that's the joint meeting.
I'm getting a different registration page.
And Becky, this is what you were talking about right earlier? This is the
Yeah,
document you were
yeah,
talking about.
yep.
Okay.
Okay, Jeff's in the waiting room, so Jeff's almost in.
Do you want to shoot that to everybody else?
Yeah.
I don't have their email.
Thank you.
I'll send it out
Thank
real
you,
quick.
thank you. That better be empty.
Is our speaker joining remotely, or is she coming in here? Is that,
I think she is coming in, but it might be good to send Leah that too. Thank you. Good point.
Just in case.
Yes. All right, well.
What is the bus tour going to be?
A tour of development, so a kind of the details to be determined, but kind of a tour of around, yeah, and looking at different types of developments and things. It's been on the,
County, I presume, we'd be out in the unincorporated area most of the time.
to be determined how that's going to work. I think it's, you know you're joking, but I think there's, yeah, we need to do both. Okay. Sorry about that delay, but this was a good, if this was going to happen, this was good because our speakers, we still got some time before our speaker gets here. Yeah.
Those guys haven't joined yet, right? I don't see it, yeah.
Okay, I was sitting, I'm trying to remember where we left off, and I think there was a question about when we receive, how we publish the packet.
Yeah.
And so we, so for example, coming up for our next meeting, the Tuesday, the week before Tuesday, that's when you'll get your staff reports and any communications
We
that
usually
we've
get that
received
Wednesday
at that
night.
point.
We usually get that Wednesday
It's
afternoon.
Tuesday, Wednesday, kind of depending on, yeah.
Thought it was Thursday.
That's the printed packet when, yeah. And then our bylaws say that public comment, the deadline to provide written public comment is Monday at 10 a.m. And so the second update that occurs is after that 10 a.m. deadline, we're working behind the scenes to make sure that we've gathered everything because it gets emailed to the planner. Sometimes it comes to our planning at Lawrence KS email. So we're gathering that all up, getting that so that we can publish that. So that's what that second one is that.
I guess what I was suggesting was consider a drop on Friday of whatever might have come in between then and now. That way, the Monday drop is, well, presumably smaller and more consumable.
Presumably, the other thing to consider, though, is a lot of the reason for that Monday deadline is because of the weekend. And so that is why we're seeing the bulk, things might come in during the weekend when people
Okay.
have more time to put their pen to paper. So
I think we'll definitely get in on this. Next month, we're talking about the bylaws and the way that works. So just want to kind of bring back to the agenda. We're talking about the application types this morning. So want to bring that back for next month's discussion.
Okay. Yeah, I think we just kind of follow the trail of things that might be a part of the bylaws conversation.
Yep.
Not just application type. But,
Yep.
All right. Thank you for that.
So any questions? Let me share my screen again here. Oh, I got to get into the Zoom. Sorry, guys. Any questions about the types of applications that you receive and the process associated with that, or maybe the application types that you don't, that are more administrative, that don't come before you? Any questions about any of that maybe we didn't have a chance to really dig into during our orientation?
Not for me.
It's not a question, but it's just kind of something I think about when we get an application is like, I know we say the city isn't impacted fiscally or something. There's a line that says no financial impact to the city or something like that. You know what I'm talking about? Is there, do we have data to quantify, okay, this is going to need new roads, and I know that it's not in our lane, but anything that would add color to that application, I think would be helpful for me to think about, okay, what are the long-term, I don't know, maybe it's not, again, maybe it's not in our lane and we can't get that information, but if there's any way for us to say, okay, this is going to need 5 new roads, and we don't necessarily need to know what a road's going to cost, but 5 new roads means, you know what I mean? Like it sort of implies there's a cost or
Well,
something.
and I do understand your point. I think, though, that it's important to remember that those are more the policy or
Yeah.
that's going to be that the city commission will be then, that's part of their discussion and determinations.
Sure.
Jeff, I don't know if you want if you have more to,
That line on your agenda is a software perk. It's because they use everything going to the city commission, and they have that as their requirement is what they're looking at. So when it goes to city commission, we have to put in that, I think whoever says like this doesn't impact financially, because we got to put something in there because otherwise the software won't behave and then you can't get the packet out. So in your world, it doesn't have a financial impact because what you're just doing is granting a land use approval at some point. It's when the city commission does their action is when it may have that impact. If you go to final plat, then there's going to be the cost of the roads in perpetuity for the city, the water, stormwater, those kind of things, and they can take that into account. Now, when you go through those development packages, the way that the administrative policy works is the developer is required to pay and upfront all of that cost for that infrastructure, and then if it meets our standards, we assume responsibility of it going forward at that point in time. And that's a agreement between MSO and as that develops. Typically, that takes the form of a public improvement plans is when you'll see that come in, which is many steps below where you kind of are engaged with that application. So, but you wouldn't normally see that on a planning commission pack, except that software just will not let us proceed until we put words in there.
Strong, welcoming neighborhood, the same thing.
Same thing. It's got to have that, and it's what it is. Until you click that little box that it likes, it will not let Denny publish that packet. So for the bulk of it, that really doesn't impact into your realm of decision making. Now the question about is, will there be roads and what will be? That is a city commission discussion because that is the financial bit is where they engage on that process.
Which brings up another potential thing to discuss at a mid-month is this question of policy. I mean, to go through and think, okay, to kind of hash out a little bit more clearly what is policy and what is strictly land use. Because sometimes that line gets blurred, I think, in our discussions. So to kind of think about what is it when we're discussing policy and how far can we go with that?
But isn't our comprehensive plan policy?
Well, that's one of my big questions. So we bring up the comprehensive plan a lot, but then sometimes we're told it's policy.
Yeah.
So that would be something to discuss, I think.
I think Commissioner Ashford said a very good point on that one. And in the line between policy and land use is really, are you quasi-judicial or are you legislative in your practice? Text amendments and comprehensive plan amendments are legislative, and so you have a little bit more of a broader latitude there. When you get into those quasi-judicial items, you're only on those 10 decision-making criteria. That's where you have to make your decisions. So I think that's a good topic we can bring back and have a broader discussion on.
all right, well, Leah should be joining us in another 10 minutes or so, so kind of want to bring us back to the, anything else related to the overview of the planning, or of our application types? Or we do always at the end of our meeting, which we may not have time for, have an opportunity for questions in general. So if anybody has just kind of questions about how we, what's going on behind the scenes, or what your role is, or anything related to the Planning Commission, we could do that now too.
Oh, we're waiting for our guest speaker.
Yeah.
What is the, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Commissioner Munch managed to wade through the technical issues.
Glad to be here. Thank you all.
Welcome. Sorry about that snafu this morning.
All good.
What is the timing for the Land Development Code update to be out through and final?
The timeline that we're still running on kind of that same timeline that our original timeline, which would have it going to the City Commission in this summer, hopefully June.
Okay.
I know the consultant is wrapping up their work on Module 3. Module 3 is going to be the module that really looks at the process that is involved. And so at tomorrow's steering committee meeting, I think they might be providing an overview of that. There's a survey that they've been working on that they want to go through with the steering committee, but probably won't get into Module 3 in any detail tomorrow. We'll start that in March.
Okay.
So what is the Planning Commission's role going to be in that? How is that going to play out?
Jeff?
Your role is kind of similar to what you do with most text amendments. It's to review and provide the recommendation to the city commission. The interesting bit is that steering committee has been really into the line by line and the weeds of the whole process, and that's where Commissioner Rexroad and previously Commissioner Carpenter were your representatives of going through that code. So the steering committee is really doing that lower level analysis, and when you get it, it would be to review it kind of in the package as a whole. Does it meet? Does it comply with what we think comprehensive plan is supposed to be having in there? Is there any major issues in there that you're seeing that you see as a planning commission that maybe we don't see as staff or you don't see as a governing body? Just kind of give those highlights to it, and then again recommend to the body going up, because it is effectively a text amendment in the way that it wants to process out.
Will there be just one public hearing? And will that be with the planning commission?
It would be a public hearing at city commission too, because they'd have to go through ordinances and stuff. But we've had a lot of public engagement throughout the process with focus groups and different meetings and going out to, I can't even remember all the places we've been to in the public to talk about it over the time. So there's been a lot of work of trying to getting those engagements, including surveys and online doodads that I can't remember the technical name to suddenly, but it's like a survey, but it's not a survey. I forget what it's called now. But
Town hall meetings on every
exactly
module, breakouts by subject type
Yeah, it's been all these subgroups have been going, so it's like,
from all over the community.
yeah, so there's been a lot of things, and I cannot think of what that technical word for that survey instrument was that was in there, but the caffeine hasn't kicked in. But there's been a lot of different processes that have been going on throughout.
And there'll be more opportunity. We've done public engagement with each of the modules, so we'll do more with Module 3 as well. And the modules have been such that even though they're 3 modules, they have, you know, as Module 2 came out, it still included Module 1. Module 3 will still include 1 and 2, so people have an opportunity to provide comment about the whole document at any time that they can and want to.
Good.
Now think about, go ahead.
But when it comes up to the city commission in June, I mean, is that going to be their action item, or is that just a presentation of how it's going? I mean, is that?
Well, I think those details are still probably to be determined, but ultimately that goal would be for adoption of the Land Development Code this summer.
And so, but prior to that time, then, I mean, you're also sort of test driving this thing with staff to make sure.
Yeah, staff's definitely been
All
part of
the-
that, right?
yeah.
Yep.
We're
And
definitely.
that
All the right buttons that you hit bring up the right information and all that kind of thing.
It's like the software system right now. We're definitely, we get it. We're trying to figure out where it breaks, where it doesn't work, doesn't behave correctly, and if we do, we get those comments back. And so you'll see as we go through the iterative changes, like there might be some changes in Module 2 that we found out when we got Module 3 put together, it didn't quite mesh together properly. So we go back and get that one, which inevitably we'll do something in Module 1 that will need an adjustment. And so we're always trying to figure out how we get all that diagnosed.
Okay, so that's all done by the time the city commission gets it.
That's
I mean, it's not going to be foolproof, but.
That's our hope.
Okay.
Yeah, and with every time you do a zoning code, there's always what we call a shakedown period. If you work it for about 12 to 18 months, and then you come back with one big text amendment for all the things that you didn't, that didn't quite sync correctly or haven't behaved as we would expect it. And so I expect probably 12 to 18 months after you adopt, we would do a big text amendment to just get, maybe there's a weird space or a comma's not, in the middle of a word, which, can happen just when you type, and get those things. But then also go, well, this isn't behaving like we thought it would in real life, so let's maybe adjust it just a touch. So
Think about tangential to the timeline and that work, the public process and the lengths that group has gone through to reach out to different members of the public and make sure that everyone who wants to be involved can be involved and is aware of what's going on. And I think back to other things like what we've just gone through with wind and what we did previously with other things. And invariably, you get to the day and there are people who didn't know what was going on and feel, some degree of dissatisfaction with not having been informed. I think to myself, man, how could we have done more? But I also know at the same time, the county is able to reach me every single time I owe them property taxes.
Say that again.
The county is able to reach me every single time I owe property taxes, right? There are ways, and I don't know if it's because of what that tax statement means to me, that I open it, I read it, I know what it is, and I know that it's there and I act on it, versus I get this other thing and it doesn't resonate with me, so I discard it and forget about it. I just think that we need to continue to work on communication, particularly in rural Douglas County, right? Where issues may or may not be immediately adjacent to them, just because of the longer distances, they might not be within a notification window, but would still have an interest in knowing what's going on inside their Douglas County. Yeah. Fill in time till our speaker comes.
Is there any thought on how this is going to affect our work area at the commission? Like when you guys are talking about code itself, do you see the structure of our meetings changing any? Or is it going to be sort of, just the same but different,
Yeah, I would look to Becky and Jeff for more on that. The code itself, I don't know that's going to change the structure of the meetings. I don't think it changes the golden factors. Some of the decision criteria might be viewed, they might look at it, I don't know, but Jeff?
I don't see it changing the way your bylaws run your meeting. It'd be more of a question of what comes to you at the ultimate thing. Because if you look at when you do a zoning diagnostic and you look at your use table, you end up spending a lot of time going, well, is that really a special use, or should that just be a use permitted by right? And so if it's use permitted by right, it would enter that administrative channel potentially. If it was a special use, then it would come before you. Usually one of the hallmarks of a zoning code that's not behaving very well is when you see a lot of special uses or special things that start rising up, is because there's something in there where the code is out of step with what's going on in reality. And so that's one of our hallmarks that we usually will use as indicators. If you start seeing a lot of special uses or a lot of preliminary and final development plans, that's also a good indication that people are trying to find a way to make reality fit our code, which is, state of the art 2006. So you see a little bit of those things there. I mean, the best way I can describe it is just think about driving a car from 2006 and driving a car from 2023 and how different that would be. And that's actually my reality. So that's the best way I can describe it is like you have power, nothing. You may have a cassette tape player, and nowadays it's like Bluetooth and things where the car brakes when you look at it wrong. So that's kind of where you have in there. The other thing we look at is we look at what's going before the Board of Zoning Appeals, because that is really the true canary in the coal mine, because they're giving a lot of conversations about setbacks or a lot of conversations about whatever it is, and they're having to see that keep repeatedly coming up. That's a sign to us that either there's a text amendment that needs to be had, or the code is really out of step with what people are doing in reality. And so, markets change, the economics change, the conditions will change over time, and if a code doesn't keep up, those are usually the two points at which we do it. So you might see a drop in applications coming to you because we would actually see less special uses potentially in that table, depending upon what the community would like to see. So.
We'll see
To shorten, once again, potentially shortening our meetings is another crack at that.
Yeah.
Is the fact that we won't see
Right.
those variances and those
Right.
special uses.
Right.
We'll see some interesting things we haven't seen before, some different uses and combinations of uses inside of things we haven't seen before. I'm excited for it.
I saw that Commissioner Hayden was able to join as well, so just wanted to say hi to her.
Hello, Commissioner Hayden.
We are, for Commissioner Munch and Hayden that joined, were unable to join until later, that we are expecting to have our affordable housing administrator come and join us here within the next few minutes, and she'll be giving us an overview of affordable housing. Her name's Leah Roslin. So as soon as she arrives, we'll start on that topic. And right now we were kind of rearranging the schedule. We have had time for general questions at the end of the agenda, but knowing that when we'll want as much time with Leah as we can, we were just taking the opportunity to ask those questions now.
Yeah, and some of the things that we talked about is, so next month we have a meeting on bylaws. Is that right, Jeff?
Yep.
our bylaws. So, just trying to think of things that will come up. And one of the things that we brought up today was, how to make our meetings more efficient. So you guys, if you have thoughts, be thinking about that. So when we meet next month, we can go into that. And Becky went over different application types. So I don't know if you guys have, before our guest comes, if you guys have questions or comments on any of those issues, just, this would be a good time.
Yeah, I do, actually. If we're going to talk about the bylaws, I'd be interested in talking about the ad hoc committee process that's set out in the bylaws.
I think that's on the agenda.
We will definitely, that'll be
Yeah.
yep, we'll include that for our March mid-month meeting discussion, for sure.
Great, great. Is there any particular work we plan on doing with the bylaws, or is it just an overview of them, or anything I should read to prepare?
I would definitely recommend reviewing the existing bylaws. We aren't planning on bringing revised bylaws to you all for your consideration at that time. It'll really be a discussion to help us guide if we're going to make changes to those bylaws, what those might look like. And then that would come to you for consideration at a future planning commission meeting.
Thank you.
Is that a meeting that legal counsel can be at as well
Our mid-month meeting,
for the discussion of the bylaws?
I will check.
That would be
Yeah.
handy. Thanks.
Is it just voting? So the bylaws to change, again, it's just like a vote, like how we vote on other stuff?
As far as I
Majority,
understand
simple
it.
majority kind of thing?
Well, the bylaws would be, you'd have to take an action on them at a business meeting. So effectively the mid-month would be just a discussion.
Okay.
What do you like, what you don't like in the bylaws? And that gives us some idea and direction about what to make in the revisions that you would want to see to consider as part of that. So any of that, voting for that would all go to the business meeting. So that'd be miscellaneous new or old business at the end.
Would it be a public hearing item?
Yes. Well, depends on the application type, because some codes you have.
I mean, like if we're voting on to change the meeting time, for example, we have a tie vote. Does that mean it fails or does it mean it carries? Like, we have the same rules that we have for? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We can bore you.
It's a different question there, because it's a question of how you choose to operate at that point in time. I would surmise that you'd probably try to work towards consensus on the bylaws, but we can thread that needle if we have to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Consensus would be the preferred approach.
Well, can I ask a sort of big general question about affordability?
And I'm looking at Jeff, but
I will go to the podium, so I'll save everybody from the next training here. So. Apologize to Kurt for the movement here. I'm the slight stand-in for
Okay.
Of course, I moved it. I usually have to turn around. I'm sorry about that.
oh, and I see Leah is on her way in.
Oh, perfect.
okay.
Good, because this could have gotten really rough quickly here. I've been with Ahab for a long time, but I don't know if I could do it all there. But of course, what was the question?
My general question is, I really want to know what is the city's goal, and how do we know when we reach that goal?
So
What is the signal?
the Ahab goes through a retreat process, not too dissimilar to what you do, and they look at what the numbers are, and they have a wonderful dashboard. I'll see if I can't somehow coax it online here real quick so you can take a look. But they have a conversation every year about, what do we want to do? What do we want to strive for? What are the segments in the market that we would like to get to and hit? And so what they have, and I will put it on screen really quickly as it loads up here. is they have a dashboard that they look at to see how they're doing in terms of not just where the money is going, but how many units are they achieving. And it really gives a breakdown of not just, unit type, but are they units that are being rehabbed and kept in preservation. So it's the maintenance of the affordable housing in the community, or are they using down payment assistance and household vouchers, which is a different form of getting people into affordable housing. But they also have this wonderful thing is that, you can look at it through what has been the funding sources over the time, what are the number of units over the years, and those kind of details. And if you want to pull up a project, I'll just pick on one that I can see real quickly on screen here. You can click on it on the map, and it'll let you see the application link, some of the details that we know about the project. And so about every year, AHAB goes through a retreat, and they look at it and they say, this was our 5-year goal. How are we doing? Did we meet the mark? If we met the mark, do we want to push that out a little further? And so it's kind of fluctuating as they're seeing how it responds. But, to give you an idea, is they've got, there's a box in the way, 810 units that have really come into the process and coming online in the community.
So for example, I guess what is the 5-year goal? And what is the signal that it's been achieved or not?
That might be a Leah question. I'll leave on that one there. But I think that just depends on a lot of the detail that goes into AHAB on those questions there. So, and I'm doing a bad stand-in job, so feel free to.
I was actually going to run.
Thank you, Jeff.
Oh, by all means, please. I can keep covering for a while.
The AHAB goal. The AHAB goal is to increase rental housing by 1,000 in the next 5 years.
Okay.
And some of that I'll go over in my presentation.
Okay. Feel free. One thing I will say, and since I've had the privilege of working with AHAB since its very beginning, is this started in about 2014 when we were asked to do a bit of research and find out that what was going, just what was the history of affordable housing. And affordable housing history goes all the way back to the 60s here in Lawrence and Douglas County. And so in the 90s, there was the Housing Trust Fund that was established, and there was a board that oversaw the Housing Trust Fund at that point in time. And Affordable Housing Advisory Board, or AHAB as we call it, is really that second iteration of that board as it's moving through here. And so they've really been focused on not just the Housing Trust Fund and the way the dollars are spent, but how can they do policy changes? How are there things that could help us kind of go through those processes and lines? And so they've been engaged in the Land Development Code Update Committee about, maybe there's a change to the base districts that would be good, or there's an overlay that would be helpful, and any number of different things to talk about how zoning could affect affordable housing. But they also look at the other side of things is, what are some of the other policies that could affect affordable housing? They were asked to look at right of refusal. I can't think of what the term is, but that you couldn't refuse vouchers for people to do that. Also looking at, is there a right of first refusal on purchase that may be something that the people could consider as part of that. So they also look at things that not just put affordable housing into the community, but keep it in the community. So working with Housing Trust Fund or working with different entities, because if a property is running through its tax credit, it's coming up on year 29, and year 30, the individual can sell the property, and how do they kind of keep that affordable housing stock in the community and working? So they really have a broad spectrum when they approach those.
So depending on what definition we're using as affordable, do cities in general have a goal of 10% affordable housing, 20%? Is there some larger reach that we're trying to get to? Besides, there's 1,000 units for the next 5 years, but what does that mean in the larger context in terms of the percentage of housing available?
And that's a great question. It's going to vary depending upon the community and what you're seeing in there. Ballpark, Lawrence has about 43,000 housing units, so 1,000 is really, fractional in the grand scheme of the amount of units that are out there. But when you talk about it, you'll see it in Plan 2040. There's a definition for what is affordable in one of the sidebars, and it lines up with what affordable housing also has as their definition for what is affordable. One of the things that we're working on right now is we had a housing study completed in 2018, I think. It may have been 2019, early 19. It gave us an idea of what was the type of units and housing that we needed to have in the community. I think we'd all agree since then there's been a couple of big things that have changed the world. And so we're looking at getting that housing study updated and kind of get us an understanding of what are the units that we need to have. And it's not even just about the price point, it's actually about the amenity type. Does it have the right number of bedrooms and bathrooms for what people are looking for in the community? So does somebody need 4-bed, 5-bed? Is that something that we have or something we should focus on? Are people looking for rentals, or are they looking for ownership? Are they looking for location, or are they looking for transportation links? So there's any number of things that can kind of come into there. Kurt's driving. I'm going to step away from the mouse real quick.
Do we have a definition of, a specific definition of an affordable house, affordable housing? What is that?
I will turn the floor to Leah with the experts.
Would you all, should I do my presentation or should we stay with Q&A?
I think it's whatever you prefer. How long is your presentation?
Well, about 45 minutes, so.
We don't have.
Yeah,
And
we-
this meeting stops at 9. So
Okay.
we've got about 40 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what would you all prefer? Should I go through some of what I have?
What do you
or-
think, what do you think is the most important information you'd like us to hear?
Well, some of what I was going to go over were the definitions of affordability, some of the need in our community, and what our goals and strategies are to meet that need. So it might be beneficial for me to, since some of those questions are naturally going up, to try and get through some of the slides. Maybe I'll skip some of the videos that I have included and try and just open it up wider and get through it faster and just take questions. Does that work for you all?
Ask some questions along the way, maybe?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Kurt is the.
All set.
You're amazing. Thank you so much. Okay. See if I can find it in here. Holy cow, it's literally up. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
just gotta share it in Zoom, so top right there, the share thing, you know? Yeah, you know the deal. Yeah.
Okay, so I apologize, I don't know what Jeff has gone over, but these are the city strategic plan goals and indicators that relate directly to housing affordability. So SWN 5, we want to decrease the percentage of households that are experiencing housing stress, which is defined as spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And that is inclusive of not only rent or mortgage, but also any utility payments, insurance, taxes, et cetera. All of that is taken into account.
And roughly how many units would that be, the 30%?
Well, it's not hard to get on, you don't really get it on units, you just get it on the amount of people that are renting, so we don't know. But I mean, it's basically the way to boil it down is it's 1 in 5 homeowners in the community are housing stressed, it's 1 in 2 renters that'll end up being housing stressed.
1 in 5, and so 20% of housing, 50% of rentals.
Ballparkish, yeah, and that can take a lot of different forms depending upon how those households are formed and maintained.
Thousands of instances of that.
Right, and if you want to kind of put the number to it, Lawrence is 56% rental currently. So homeowner is the minority in the way the market is currently outlaid.
Okay, thanks.
Does affordable housing mean that it is subsidized?
Not necessarily, no. It can take a lot of different forms.
Okay.
And I have a slide on that. So I'll just skip through this one. So yeah, the 48% and 17% were the numbers of households experiencing housing stress as of the last census data we had. And then SWN 6, decrease of point in time of homelessness, which is directly related to the number of affordable units we have. And then SWN 7 is related to sales tax dollars, investments, and leverage. This slide I'm just going to zip through, but I wanted, wanted you all to see that affordable housing impacts so many of our city goals and indicators that aren't directly like housing specific, but it moves the needle on all of these. So whether residents rate the city as a good place to live, how many residential units within a half mile of green space, walking, biking trails, libraries and schools, trips not taken in cars, BIPOC folks feeling welcome, because as we'll see, BIPOC folks experience a disproportionate amount of housing stress. Crimes per resident, if folks have a safe and affordable home that they're in, they're not on the streets, crime decreases. Fires contained to the room of origin. CPS reports, a safe community, mental health crisis. So sexual violence, domestic violence, it hits and moves the needle on all of these. Okay, so to go back to the questions, so when we talk about affordable housing, sometimes we'll talk about big A affordable and little a affordable. Big A affordable housing, what we mean, and that's what the City of Lawrence supports through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and that's what the Affordable Housing Advisory Board is focused on. We're focused on big A affordable housing, and that's subsidized housing that is affordable for those at or below 80% AMI. It's subsidized for both the developer and it's subsidized for the residents that live there.
AMI?
Area median income.
Okay, and what is that for here?
It depends on the household size. So I can bring up a chart.
It varies from year to year depending upon how HUD defines it, depends on your household
Just
size.
order of magnitude, just ballpark.
Oh, if you
$10,
It's like 90,000.
$90,000?
for a family of,
That's, I believe so, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. And if we have time, I can pull up the chart. So the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority annually publishes a table. And so you can see on that table, it shows what 30%, 50, and 80% of AMI is for different household sizes.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah. So the developers need subsidy in order to make the development pencil out, and the residents also need subsidy in the form of housing vouchers in order to afford to live there. All residents must be income verified, and as it says, the rent or mortgage is determined based on the resident's income so that they're not going over 30% of their household income for housing expenses. And then small A affordable housing is market rate housing that is attainable and affordable for residents without exceeding 30% of household income. That's what we might have considered like starter homes or older housing stock that is just naturally occurring affordable housing stock. And that might be folks at 80% AMI living in those units, because we know that not all people who qualify for housing assistance are getting it, but it could be any number of residents. Any other questions about how housing affordability is defined?
like I said, that also matches with the definition in Plan 2040 of what does affordable housing is. So it's in one of the definitional sidebars, and I think it's in chapter 4 of the document.
And again, what did you say was that ballpark for AMI?
Well, it depends on the household income. So let me see if I can.
I just thought there was a number.
90,000.
90,000, okay.
For
Thank
family
you.
of 4.
Yeah.
And again, that'll reset every year as HUD revises the numbers and things occur. So it's every 12 months we relearn the numbers, and then it also just depends on your household size of what that number would be.
Okay.
So a family of 2 is different than a family of 4, which will be different from family of 6.
Mm-hmm.
So here is like for 2 people, 30% of AMI is about 22,000, 80% is about 60. For 4 people, 80% of AMI is 75. So yeah, 100%, I'm assuming, for a family of 4 is 94. Some additional terminology that we use is housing stress / housing insecurity, and that's when, as I said earlier, a household spends more than 30% of their income on housing costs, including utilities and insurance, taxes, et cetera, and this puts a household at rent for homelessness. This is what we talk about, like one emergency away from homelessness, one big medical bill, a job loss, any number of those sort of big financial emergencies can tip that household into homelessness because they are already really spending more than they can afford on housing. Housing instability, it encompasses a number of challenges. Having trouble paying rent, overcrowding is a part of housing instability, moving frequently, or again, spending the bulk of your income on housing. And then AMI, we discussed what that means, the midpoint of area income distribution. And then some additional terms that you'll use, and I know we saw an application recently that talked about workforce housing. That doesn't have a specific definition as like defined by HUD. You'll also hear it defined as middle housing. Typically, it's housing that's affordable for those at 80 to 100% AMI. Theoretically, it's housing that's affordable to the local workforce. Now, Lawrence has a high number of jobs in the service industry. And so a lot of our local workforce is not at 80% AMI. So what would be considered workforce housing is actually too expensive for many in our local workforce, and service jobs and in care-oriented jobs like social workers, folks assisting people with disabilities, seniors, et cetera. All of those jobs typically, those are jobs that require subsidized affordable housing. LIHTC is the low-income housing tax credit. That's the main subsidy that's used for affordable housing development. That is allocated federally, and the state has a LIHTC program. The Community Land Trust is a mechanism for maintaining affordability and perpetuity. So for LIHTC projects, generally those units are affordable for 15 to 30 years, and then they come out of that period of affordability, which means that those owners can then open up the rent to, it becomes market rate housing. And unless we are able to repurchase or to purchase those units, then they fall out of affordability. The Community Land Trust is a mechanism for keeping those affordable units that the community has subsidized in affordability for perpetuity by putting the land in trust.
What's the source of funding for the subsidy?
For
any of these subsidies where we hold something, we buy something, we keep it in perpetuity. What funds that?
So it could be LIHTC. It's generally a combination of the LIHTC funds, local affordable housing trust funds.
Where does LIHTC come from? Is that local or federal?
It's federal and state. Yeah, it's allocated through the state.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And the tax credits they're not in perpetuity. So tax credits will have
Right.
an expiration life of, 15 to 30 years, depending upon what they are. And then they're only a credit of either 4 or 9%, depending upon what they get
Right.
capacitied.
And that's the concern.
So
is
were
when they
they-
drop out of that, then they lose them out of the inventory. So you don't have to
Right.
Gotcha.
Right, yeah.
Are they rental or ownership?
They could be both, but generally they're rental units. And generally, the LIHTC projects require a larger number of units. That's where you'll see the multifamily developments.
And most of that process is governed by the state's Kansas Housing Authority, or Housing Corporation, or by the issuing agency for the credit. So it's not something that the city necessarily has a role in. It's just someone's going to develop based on response of what the credit is asking to do. And so you'll hear people talk about it's got to pencil out, because otherwise you can't qualify for the credit if the finances doesn't quite work out. So AHAB spends a lot of time looking through pro formas, and understanding is if it has to be this credit at this rate, then something has to occur to get to that point. And so they spend a lot of time looking at what does that dynamic of how many units to achieve the credit, and that's a fair to say it's probably a big conversation point they have quite a bit throughout the year.
Yeah, and something that comes up in our meetings is we'll get an application and it'll be for rental units. And I just want to, from our talk today, it sounds like rental units are considered affordable housing. Like we just, affordable housing doesn't mean a house, it could mean a rental unit.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a misconception that, rental unit is not affordable, and it is. I mean, in fact, a majority of the affordable housing in our community is rental units, from what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, and the multifamily, the duplexes, triplexes, apartments, those are great fits for a lot of people in our community.
Yeah.
And absolutely are vital, needed affordable housing stock.
Thank you.
We cannot solve our housing affordability challenges in single-family units. We just cannot. The need
It's
is
also expensive, right? Like to get a mortgage and.
absolutely. It's more costly for the family, for the developer. Not all families can afford that, and they still deserve housing, right? And it's more expensive in terms of environmental impact for our community. If we are prioritizing and have a value for infill, if we want infill, then we have to consider multifamily.
And to go back to the kind of conversation we were kind of touching on a little bit earlier, one of the strong welcoming neighborhood indicators that Leah, it doesn't touch on here, but I will, is we've asked MSO to go through and look at the cost of infrastructure per new residential unit. For a multifamily unit, it's about $11,000. For a single family unit, it's about $23,000-ish. So, I mean, there's a differential when you start having that conversation about the cost of those things, because the essence of it is someone's got to pay for that development cost, and it's going to typically get burdened down to whoever's paying the rent or paying the mortgage of that. And so there is that effect of, $11,000 versus $23,000 and something in that costing. So, and Leah's right. It's a question of what does that family need at that point in time? Do they need a house? Do they need an apartment? Do they need a number of unit, bed, bath kind of combination? There isn't a solve-all where you just do one thing and it'll make everybody go. It just can't work that way. It's like a natural housing market. You're going to have people that are going to be looking for location, for type, for amenity. It's not any different than what you do when you buy houses and properties.
So multifamily, and particularly multifamily designed as rental, is considered almost by default as big A, affordable. But that would only be if and when that particular development was hooked up to, enabled by LIHTC or some other subsidy program.
Right, yeah.
And it doesn't really matter whether it's a new development or an existing development. That can happen at any time. Is that right or no?
Generally, it's new development.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that
Is
is.
there any restriction to something that's been built being brought into that program?
No, there are options for like rehabbing older units. Developers can get tax credits for rehabs and then make them big A affordable.
So what is the rehab requirement? So that it has to meet some certain physical standards? Is that it?
Yeah.
And existing inventory stock may not have been built to that standard.
Right.
Is that a higher cost to build to meet that standard?
No, I don't. In terms of what the state standards for building?
Right. If you can't take an existing multifamily structure and just go after this subsidy, it suggests you have to remodel it, you have to bring it up to a standard, which implies cost. So I'm just wondering, the baseline, if you're going to build big A affordable, is it more expensive because you have to meet a state or federal standard versus?
This building standards are the same, whether it's subsidized big A affordable housing or market rate housing. I would say to bring units to rehab units so that they are housing people with dignity, that is going to have some cost on the owner. But that is part of the value of that. We don't want affordable housing to be, I'm just going to to be crappy housing, right? To be dilapidated housing.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Assuming if I take this, it's a great place, it meets city code, right?
Right.
It's not deficient in any way. Could that become big A affordable?
It could be.
Where
Yeah.
I'm going with, and why I'm asking all these questions is we think about applications that come through, if someone wants to build this, and it may not be aligned with the project today, but it could be, once it's built, it could be 5 years from now.
Right.
I'm trying to think about what lens should we be looking at this through, and whether or not just the fact that we're building rental stock is a net positive.
Oh,
whether or
absolutely.
not it immediately qualifies for or designated as Big A.
Absolutely. Right, because we need more housing stock, period. We have not been building the number of units needed to meet the demand. So it really is a supply and demand equation.
Before we go down that trail, I didn't understand that in my head.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Because we'll have these conversations, well, how many affordable housing units do you have as a part of this? And if there's not anything specifically designated, even though it's against state statute, we might want to ask them for something.
Right.
But the
Right.
reality is, that stock is important.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Absolutely, because it's serving a market as well. And because we don't have adequate housing stock, that is driving up the cost of housing for everybody. Yeah, absolutely.
So to give a ballpark to your number there, and I have not done this number in a long time, so this is a dated number there, but typically the city would issue somewhere between 125, 135 building permits per year. If you were going to match that to be 1-to-1 for population growth, we'd have to be issuing close to 400 building permits per year. So, and that's been a steady trend for over 12, 14 years now of 100 permits versus the 400 to match equal to
Either an
1-to-1.
increase in the number of building permits or a change in the mix of what those building permits were designed to deliver.
Either one or the other on that one.
Okay, all right.
So I have a question about these we generally think of multifamily as these rental units, but what kind of stock do we have here where apartment buildings are owned? So the apartments are purchased, so you're essentially home ownership, but multifamily.
Like condo?
Condos are not, or just apartment buildings,
Yeah.
even apartments. I mean, our bigger cities, most people own apartments.
Yeah, okay.
That happens, all over Europe, own apartments.
One of the things we've always kind of recognized is you don't have an apartment ownership market like you would tend to see in a big city here, like you would in other places. You tend to see maybe condominiums or some of that kind of formatting and design. That was something that kind of got called in the BBC report back in 2018 was that, there is a bit of differential in what people are seeking and what the market is providing. And that was one of those that was highlighted was the one that comes to mind is a small scale ownership opportunity, but that's not, I don't think it was called in the report, but it's, Leah alluded to a starter home, and those are kind of few and far between in the world. So an apartment may be someone's,
That's a great affordable unit to own.
and that could be someone's entry into the market. And so that's something that I think you're seeing the Development Code Steering Committee and we're looking at as a planning and development services staff is how does that look like nowadays? Because what did go doesn't go anymore.
And I will say home ownership is not the right option for everybody. I think there's a value that we have associated with home ownership that has, it can be important for wealth building, but that family has to have adequate income in order to do the maintenance of whether it's an apartment, condo, duplex, or single-family unit. And the time to do the maintenance and the know-how. I mean, there are a lot of individuals in our community who would thrive in rentals, and I think the importance is that we are having adequate housing stock to meet different individual community needs, rather than have this context that the ideal is that everybody ends up in a single-family ownership unit. That's just not going to work for everybody.
No, I get it. When I think of when people talk about, and what we see when they talk about workforce housing, where you have people that can barely afford a house, I mean, an
Right.
owner, but want to own and start building that wealth, you know, we always think of single-family homes.
Right.
whereas it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't, no, yeah, duplexes,
Are
triplexes,
able
yeah,
to make that jump into ownership.
right.
That an apartment that was owned is a way to that, and I just don't see that around
Yeah.
town.
Yeah.
Or we don't hear about it.
Right.
So.
Want to skip to, okay, so this just shows, I mentioned this earlier, the disproportionate housing needs based on race and ethnicity. So this is just overall based on that 2018 housing study, what the housing needs are in Lawrence.
I'm assuming it's worse now?
Much worse. Much worse, yeah. Yeah, rents and mortgages, as we know, the cost of housing has skyrocketed since
I mean, the
2018.
bellwether is that is going to be your Federal Reserve interest rate. That's going to tell you all you need to know on that stressing.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then certain members of our community face disproportionate housing needs. You can see the difference based on race and ethnicity. This was what I wanted to bring up because we were sort of moving in that direction, discussing the different kinds of housing stock that are needed to meet the need for different individuals in our community. So healthy housing stock would be a mix of having transitional housing, which is, as it sounds, a transition from houselessness into permanent affordable housing, permanent supportive housing, so housing that comes with case management and or medical case management, other kinds of social service supports for people with severe or persistent mental illness, or for seniors, people with disabilities, people that really do need supports in order to stay housed. We need affordable rentals, big A affordable home ownership, and then we need attainable and affordable market rate housing for folks at all the range of AMI scales. And as Jeff alluded to earlier, the market has really been, or I think I heard you say something about this. The market has really been responding to building not those starter units that that so many of us need, but the bigger, more expensive houses, because that's how developers are making money. They have to make their living, right? And so that's how they're able to do it.
I've often said, I wonder if I'm right, that you can't build an affordable house.
It's very difficult without subsidy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's an AHAB member actually that is trying to do that. He said he's doing an experiment and he's seeing if he can build an affordable house without any subsidy. He's like, I don't think I can make it pencil out.
I wonder how much of it's code and how much of it's land, just the high cost of land in Douglas County.
It's both. Yeah.
People want to be here and they keep bringing you money.
Right, right.
The
Yeah.
old rule of thumb with financing was 20% of a house will be spent in land cost. And I think that rule really still holds pretty true. So whatever you pay for the land is going to dictate the rest of the cost of the house coming out of it, because the way that the banks and the pro formas will pencil out, whatever that entry is on land will really set your bar for the cost of the house going forward.
It's so interesting, one of the things the lenses we look through when we're making decisions is the impact on property values, and we don't want to do anything that makes property values go down, but that is really one of the things that needs to happen if we want to get at lower cost housing. Interesting.
And,
Go ahead.
no, please.
I was going to say, to tag on what Gary said, so land cost, and then he said code, and you shook your head somewhat vigorously. So would you elaborate on that, the part that code plays in this?
Yeah, well, things like parking requirements can really add up, particularly if you're looking at those larger multifamily developments. I don't know what our parking requirements are, if it's 2 spots per for 2 bedrooms, or...
Oh, it just depends on what it is on those things. But I mean, parking, I think, is a big one that you do. You do end up getting into it. I'm probably stealing Leah's thunder here, so she'll have to, hide my desk chair to pay me back for this. But if you get into very restrictive zoning, like you can't do certain things in RS7, but you can in 5, that drives the cost of land up because now you've set the floor for the minimum square footage, which sets the price of the house because 20% of it, your land is 20% of your house. So that's going to drive your costing up on that one. There are other things that everybody has to pay in those things. Everybody's going to want sidewalks and street lights and fire hydrants and, minimum building safety and life codes. And those things, those have costs associated with them. You do have to have certain plumbing requirements. So it's really, when you get down to it, it's really those things that we talk about is minimum parking standards and minimum, setback standards. Those dimensional and density standards really start to do that effect on what
Number
that
of
is.
units on a particular piece of ground.
Exactly.
Oh my
All of
goodness.
those things conspire to drive the cost of an individual place up.
And there's certain codes you don't want to vary. I mean, you don't want to change the fire code. The fire code should just be uniform. The building code should be uniform throughout. I think we can, they have good community merit on those things there. But the conversation we've had at the Land Development Code Steering Committee is are you asking for the right setbacks? Are you asking for the right parking? How are we dialing that in? And then, one of the things that you always want to do is with affordable housing is you always strive for it to be interspersed and indistinguishable. You don't want it to be, someone can look at it and go, well, that's an affordable house. That's a stigma you don't want to put someone through. And so, you don't want to change codes to give that impression that it's not indistinguishable, because that has effects on all those many factors that Leah pulled up there. So it is a very interesting balancing act about, diagnosing what that code parameter needs to be. And it can manifest in any number of ways depending on each project.
One of the things you'll see in the Land Development Code update is it's been informed by this discussion. So some of these things you'll find changed.
I know we talked about parking spaces. And you may not be able to say, but were you the queen of the world? Are there specific things that you think could be changed that would still meet what Jeff says? I don't want it to be indistinguishable from, but would lower the price. Are there things that you can identify for us?
Well,
Or is this
Stream-
just, well, this is just the way it is?
No, there are really specific things that could make an impact on housing affordability for everyone. Streamline permitting and processing would be helpful, and that looking at costs associated with that, but also exclusionary zoning has really increased the cost of housing. Exclusionary.
Tell me what that means specifically.
Primarily or exclusively allowing single-family units. If you look at the most expensive housing markets in the United States, they are predominantly single-family zoning exclusively. So San Francisco, I think it's like 85% of their zoning is all single family. Again, looking at the most expensive markets, because the land costs are the same, right? The infrastructure costs are relatively the same, whether you're putting 1 unit or 4 units. You can also look at minimum lot size, making a huge impact on housing affordability. So I would make minimum lot size much smaller. Look at frontage, because all of this again is a value and an aesthetic that has been set based on certain really blatantly white middle-class values that are not reflective of our whole community, and yet they're driving up the cost of housing. And the people most disproportionately impacted, we saw, are the people with the least privilege.
So I take it you are not able to and make that happen?
No.
Do you see, now Gary's talking about the land use that is changing. Do you see, I presume you've been involved in that, do you see changes in that you think will help
I
with
think
this?
so. Yeah, as Gary said, it's been a focal point of the conversation in the Land Development Code update. So I am very hopeful. Looking at Becky, we haven't seen Module 3 or the final drafts, but it has been a central point of the conversation.
Are there, and this may be too much in the weeds, are there other towns, cities like Lawrence that have changed their land use policies, codes that you could point to that have really driven the price down?
Yes, although I think a lot of those changes have just happened like in the last 5 years because the housing crisis has gotten so severe that it has forced communities to look at their codes.
It's a big city, but you can look at Houston for some examples of some pretty remarkable things they've done to change to make.
For neighborhoods?
Yeah, they've done some remarkable things across the board there.
Where, Gary? I didn't.
Houston. Houston, Texas, both with homelessness and housing affordability and the way they've organized their government to work with private NGOs made a remarkable difference.
Thinking about things in the code, a sort of technical question, is there something in the code? So one of the ways to reduce the cost of building a house is to make it smaller, and that's also a sustainability issue.
Yeah.
In terms of having smaller houses. Is there something in the code that blocks, that has a minimum square footage for housing? I've heard also that it involves banking, whereas banks sometimes won't give loans for certain square footage of housing. So that's a whole nother complex thing. But is there something in the code that...
Be a Becky question.
There are covenants, too.
That's true.
What was that?
The covenants.
Neighborhood covenants.
Neighborhood covenants.
Sorry, restate your question.
Is there anything in the code that determines the minimum square footage of housing, of a house?
Of the lot or the house?
No, the house.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, what it would be determined, under our current code, it would be determined really on your setbacks, amount of pervious surface. There are some, you couldn't have 100% impervious curb, so there's kind of set up where you'd have a yard, a side yard, and those kind of things. But it's really kind of dictated on those parameters, those density and dimensional standards, and parking often can be a determining factor as well.
Okay.
I think, and you would certainly know, or somebody would certainly know, from 50 years ago, the size of houses, the square footage has grown, but am I not correct in thinking that that is starting to contract a little bit now on the square footage of houses that are being built? Am I wrong on that?
I am not sure.
Okay, well then I'm probably wrong.
I don't know.
Haley, you have like 5 minutes, so if there's something you really want to hit, you have 5 minutes.
Well, is there anything else that you all are particularly interested in? So the additional information that I had was going over our community plan, A Place for Everyone, which is our community plan to end chronic homelessness and just go over the goals and strategies as related to affordable housing. And then some barriers in meeting our goals. Perhaps I will just go over some of those really briefly. So some of the barriers in meeting our affordable housing goals, I think this is important for you all to think about. So funding, restrictions, and code we discussed. Oh, sorry, let me. I was trying to get through it quickly. An equitable public participation process, infill lot scarcity, and local developer capacity. Those are all current barriers. I was going to show a video, and then you will hear common neighborhood concerns about any new affordable housing development. It doesn't matter if it's a single family, small infill, like in my neighborhood, there have been, the neighbors have been unsupportive even for one single family home ownership unit, or if it's for a big multi-family development. A lot of the concerns that you will hear neighbors say are pretty consistent. There are concerns about parking and traffic before even those studies have been done, concerns about property value decreasing, which all research has shown that there is no negative impact on property value from putting in housing affordability, either stays the same or in some instances actually increases because you are rehabbing those dilapidated houses. There's concerns about crime, and again, this feeds into stereotypes about who lives in affordable housing, which, as I mentioned earlier, it's teachers, social workers, police officers, all of these people that are the lifeblood of our community. They're not going to bring in crime, they actually make safer neighborhoods. Increased density, people don't want their neighborhood to change. There's an expectation that I bought this house or I've lived here for 20 years and it's always going to be like that. I'm always going to have my park next door or my green space, even if it isn't an official park. I take my dog out there, and there's just resistance to change. People don't want changing neighborhood character. Again, there's an expectation the neighborhood's always going to stay the same, but that's just not realistic. And so really weighing the values or dislike of neighborhoods changing versus the needs of people to be housed. And then there's this argument that multifamily units are unnecessary and that instead we should be building single-family home ownership units. Well, I hope that we've talked and at least started the conversation about how that is not going to meet the need. That is unrealistic, that we are going to build the number of houses needed in single-family homeownership units. We need multifamily units in our community. So,
Will you send the deck out?
I would love to, yeah. And I know we're at a time boundary, but is there anything else before we break? I'm sorry, I couldn't get here earlier.
I've got a couple of rentals, and the single largest expense that we have is property taxes.
Oh, God.
Right, so when we talk about property values being foundational to the cost of rentals, it's not just acquisition of the property, but it's the ongoing every year property taxes that you pay. And you showed a slide about all the things that are tangential to housing affordability and affordable housing. I would argue that commercial tax base is one of those. We have got to grow commercial tax base in this town to help at least control the cost of property taxes. Man, it just kills you. And as a landlord, I mean, you have to pass it on. Mm-hmm. It's just a cost.
Right.
All right, so.
As I understand, though, what brings in the most taxes is industrial base, right?
When I say commercial, I'm talking about anything not residential.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
so-
because
so yes.
I'm thinking of residential versus like retail, commercial, and then industrial.
But retail commercial is multiples of what residential is, and industrial, I'm honestly not sure what the delta is between that and retail commercial. We have a small little commercial building over on Pennsylvania Street, and our taxes there are 8 times per square foot what a house is.
And it's this broke
Eightfold.
chicken and egg thing because companies are looking at if employees can afford to live in the community before they bring industry.
Right.
Yeah, Hallmark, when we met with them, said that their main concerns for employees are affordable housing, childcare, and transportation. That's what employers and industry is looking at when they move into a community.
Yeah.
Can it support that?
Well, of course, the wages that they pay are a big part of that, in terms of whether they can afford something or not.
I don't want to stop it. I apologize. I have to.
No, understood, Gary.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are the students in our community affecting the housing goals in a way that would be different for a non-college community?
They are impacting our housing market, absolutely. Yeah. KU students were not included in that 2018 housing study. So when we look at the needs, that is taking student needs out of it. But they are really changing the market because they're taking, students are taking what would have been good little A affordable housing stock for families. If you look at like East Lawrence, for example, how the number of those single family homes that have been divided up, or KU students can get several roommates and live in those and be able to afford those units, where a single mom or even 2 parents with a couple of kids working as teachers they just don't have the same purchasing power.
Thanks, Leah. And, something that, as a planning commission, oftentimes we'll get an applicant present a project, and it's not perfect, but I think from listening to you today, I think sometimes even if it's not perfect, maybe it's going to move the ball a little bit. So as a planning commission, I think we should take that into account, that, this is a need, and yes, there are a lot of concerns, and the neighbors don't want it, but let's think about the other side of the,
Right.
So, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Can you make your slides available to us?
Absolutely. I'll send them to Becky.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So end it. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Drew. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See y'all soon.
And thank you for the paper.
Thank you, Leah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.